Spirelli Paranormal Investigations, Episode 2. Written by Kate Beret. Narrated by Roberto Scarlato. Chapter 1. The junk shop's front door swung open, the attached jingling bells announcing a new client. Jack ducked his head and stared at his computer screen, hoping his assistant, Marin, would field this one. Ever since he'd put the sign in the window advertising Spirelli Paranormal Investigations, he'd dealt with more crackpots, posers, and nosy neighbors than his limited patience could tolerate. And it had only been a week. Marin poked her head into his office. "There's a Mrs. Wallace here to see you." Jack glared. "She'd like to discuss a potential fraud of the paranormal variety." Marin smiled brightly. She was enjoying his discomfort with the suddenly very public face his business had assumed. His own fault, but that didn't make it any easier. "Show her in, please." Jack stood up and mustered a halfway enthusiastic smile. Marin disappeared briefly and reappeared with a petite brunette. Jack's prospective client extended her hand. "Dottie Wallace, nice to meet you." Jack Spirelli. After releasing her hand, Jack pointed to the chairs in front of his desk. "Have a seat, Mrs. Wallace." "Dottie, please, and thank you so much for seeing me without an appointment." Jack made a dismissive gesture with his hand, but didn't manage a response before Dottie chattered on. "I saw your sign in the window. I was getting my hair done just 2 doors down, and you know there's only street parking here. So I was walking to my car and I saw your sign." She practically bubbled over with excitement that the fates had smiled on her and put Jack's sign in her path. "I wasn't sure exactly what that meant, paranormal investigation, so I came right inside and asked. And I can't tell you how excited I was to find out that it's exactly what I need." Jack held back an impatient sigh. His tiny shop had been a steal, such a steal that he'd bought it outright. And then the neighborhood had exploded. Trendy hair salons were just the beginning. 2 art galleries, a boutique law firm, a coffee shop, and clients like Dottie Wallace. Generally good for the junk shop's balance sheet, but not exactly what he'd expected or wanted when he opened the biz. Jack spied the rock on Dottie's left hand. Really, though, the woman was nice enough. "How exactly can Spy help you?" "I was telling your assistant." Dottie looked around. "She's keeping an eye on the shop." "So I was telling your assistant that my mother has recently started using the services of an untrustworthy person. I'd like you to prove that this person is unreliable before she spends any more money." Dottie's face flushed a light pink. "He's taking advantage of an elderly woman. It's disgraceful. And my mother is especially vulnerable right now. My father passed just a few months ago." Jack pulled a legal pad out of the top right-hand drawer. "I assume we're talking about suspected fraud? And do you have a name?" "Conrad Blevins. And I can tell you, he is not a local man." Dottie gave Jack a significant look. Clearly, she expected some response. So Jack nodded solemnly. Of course not. What service is he claiming to provide?" "He says he can speak to the dead and that he's in contact with my father. He encourages my mother to speak to Dad through him. She brings him something of Dad's, pays him, and she gets messages in return." Dottie sat a little straighter. "It's bull. Can you help me?" Jack wanted to say yes. Not only did she look like she could afford their services, there was also the possibility her father actually was a ghost. That he'd found a way to communicate with Blevins. If Dottie's father had possessed some magic in life, and on his death had actually become a ghost, the chances were slim, but it was possible. "Where did you say your mother lives?" Dottie frowned. "I'm not sure I did. A little town just the other side of the Louisiana border. De Rotan is the name. That's not a problem, is it?" "Louisiana?" Jack tried for a bland look. He'd had more than enough of Louisiana recently. Dottie bobbed her head. Yes, that's right. Of course, I'll pay all your travel expenses. I'm sure we can agree on a per diem rate that suits you. She smiled faintly. A local investigator simply isn't an option, you understand. And there's a lovely B&B I can recommend. I know the owner. Dottie might look like a bit of fluff, but Jack would bet cash this woman had a spine of steel. That's great, Dottie. I'm sure we can work out the details. We're taking 2 cars, right? Marin lounged in Jack's office, her feet propped on the corner of his desk. She'd clearly overheard some of his conversation with Dottie, at least the part about the job being in Louisiana. Whatever her reasoning, 2 cars meant 2 gas bills, and that cut into Dottie's generous but finite per diem. Straight-faced, he leaned back in his chair and said, I don't think that makes a lot of sense. Marin considered the toes of her shoes. If we're driving separate cars, technically I'm meeting you at the job location. And if we're meeting there, I don't have to pay for your hours in transit. And if I offer you transportation, which I'll decline, Marin quickly added, then I don't have to pay mileage on your car. Although I'm sure you would like some gas money. Jack squeezed his eyes shut. Do I want to know why you want to take 2 cars so badly? Marin moved her head indecisively from side to side. Maybe not. When he gave her a blank look, she sighed. Okay, I'm not keen on sharing a car for 5 hours on the way home, if you almost get me killed again. Before Jack could deny the possibility, what were the chances of a repeat of the Mearsburg case, Marin was saying, and I might take a quick trip to New Orleans when we're done. For the record, I have no intention of getting us blown up, or even almost blown up. Their last Louisiana job had been unexpectedly hazardous. Technically, his actions had resulted in a near-miss explosion of a small town. But how was he to know moving a ward powered by death magic would cause a cataclysmic reaction? And yes, the car ride afterward might have been awkward, but it was all hazy. He'd been sleeping off the lingering effects of a head injury. Uh-huh. Because you planned on it last time? Marin shrugged. It's cool. Just trying to minimize coworker stress, maintain a good work environment. Jack laughed. You are so full of shit. But if I drive you that crazy and it keeps you from charring me on the drive home, 2 cars is fine. And I'll chip in for gas. And I get my own room at the B&B. Pushy, for someone whose job description included dusting recycled garbage and taking out the shop trash. Jack paused a moment, as if considering her counteroffer. Only if you drive once we're in town. Dottie had booked 2 rooms at Jack's request, but he hated letting go of leverage, and Marin had a sweet ride. Done. Marin cocked her head. You're a complete pain in the ass. You know that, right? And yet all the women love me. You good to leave this afternoon? Jack. Marin shook her head. All the 20-year-old women love you. They think your ratty car and your chaotic life make you cool. The look on her face made her thoughts on the subject clear. Whatever. Chapter 2. Around 7 that evening, Jack pulled into the B&B directly behind Marin's Range Rover. He pulled into a parking space and sat in the driver's seat, staring unseeing through the windshield. Marin tapped on his window. Jack opened his door. Just taking a second to make sure all my parts are intact. I didn't top 85. I set my cruise control. Marin stepped back from his door. You'd prefer to arrive in the middle of the night? Stepping out of the car, Jack said, I'm not complaining, just recovering. He slammed the door shut and stretched. Close to 5 hours in a car made his knees stiff these days. All right, let's check in. When Marin and he walked in the front door to the small reception area, no one was in sight. Marin picked up a small bell on the counter and rang it. After a few minutes passed, Jack started to consider the feasibility of walking up the staircase to the second floor and knocking on doors. Marin was getting bolder with her explorations. She walked behind the reception desk, checked the small office there, and found no one. "You have a number for these guys? Otherwise, I'm picking an empty room and letting myself in." Jack was already reaching for his phone. "Just a second. I've got the confirmation email." An older man, wheezing with exertion, came in the front door. Sweat dripped down his nose, and he pulled a huge old-fashioned handkerchief from his back pocket and dabbed at his face.
"Hi. How can I help you folks?"
Not exactly what Jack expected after hearing Dottie Wallace's glowing recommendation. "We have a reservation under the name Spirelli." Jack debated pulling up the confirmation email because Marin and he were clearly unexpected.
"Spirelli, 2 rooms. Booked for 3 days."
A deep furrow appeared between the man's eyes.
"You canceled."
Jack almost didn't want to argue. The guy seemed that put out. But he needed a place to sleep. "I did not." The man heaved a frustrated sigh, then immediately his demeanor changed.
"My apologies. Please come in and have a seat."
He motioned to a grouping of chairs placed next to the winding staircase.
"It will be just a moment for your rooms. My name is Milton. I'm one of the owners."
Marin caught Jack's eye and said quietly, "Bags." Jack nodded and threw her his keys. Then, ignoring Milton's offer to sit, he approached the counter. "Does that happen a lot?" Milton stopped typing on his computer.
"Hmm?"
Again, his brow furrowed. "Do reservations get canceled in error frequently?"
"We've had a few odd occurrences recently. Maybe our new reservation system."
Milton seemed unconvinced his reservation system was to blame, which opened up too many questions. Jack hated complicated jobs, and this check-in mess was beginning to reek of complications. "We may need to stay longer than 3 days." The words reluctantly left Jack's lips. Milton nodded in an agreeable fashion.
"We'd be happy to have you. Our snowbirds are long gone, and there's not been a summer rush yet. Plenty of room."
Jack nodded, still uneasy, and accepted the 2 keys Milton handed him.
"Dottie Wallace called. I talked to her myself before the cancellation, so don't you worry about the bill. That's to go directly to her."
Marin came in with 2 bags, so Jack didn't answer. He smiled in thanks, then turned to grab his bag from Marin. He headed up the stairs, hoping nothing bizarre was hiding in the closet or buried in the garden, because something definitely felt off. Maybe Marin felt it too, because she followed him to his room. After he unlocked the room, she said, "I'll just have a quick look. Maybe check for any signs of a recent magical signature." Jack held the door open for her. "Please." His warded, magic-spotting glasses were still in his bag. After she slowly walked around the room, he said, "Anything?" Marin didn't answer immediately. Jack walked into his room, letting the door close behind him. "You found something?" Again, she hesitated. Finally, "No, but something's weird." "If nothing's crawling out of the woodwork to melt my flesh, let's call it good. I've got some work to do." Marin's lips pinched. "I don't perceive an immediate physical threat." She gave a small shake of her head, then turned and walked out of the room without another word. Jack's eyes shot open. He glanced at his rumpled clothes, then at the clock. 2:13. He pushed his laptop, perched precariously half on and half off his stomach, onto the bed next to him. He rolled out of bed, stretched, and unbuttoned his jeans. Before he'd shucked them, he heard a woman bellow. "Shit." He tried to shake off the last remnants of sleep before he walked into the hall. Blinking at the image he stumbled into, he figured he'd failed. He was hallucinating, dreaming, something. A huge-headed creature, a cat, was plastered on the front of a t-shirt that swallowed Marin, and her feet were covered in fluorescent pink fuzzy socks. "What the hell are you wearing?" Marin scowled. "Button your pants and hurry up." She was already headed down the stairs. Jack tucked in the half of his shirt that had escaped while he'd slept, and buttoned his pants, all while following closely behind Marin. "Do you have any idea what that woman was yelling?" Marin paused on the stairs, cocked her head, and said, "Something about being late for school." "What the... school? Aren't we the only guests?" But he was talking to the back of Marin's head. About halfway down the stairs, Jack could hear faint kitchen sounds. He and Marin followed the sounds around to the back of the house, where a spacious kitchen was situated. Sounds of clattering dishes and humming emanated from within. Jack shared a glance with Marin and he motioned her ahead. "Thanks," Marin mouthed quietly. But she walked in. Jack followed directly behind her. "Sleepyheads, you're going to be late for school. Sit down at the table and eat your breakfast." An older woman with neatly styled hair, a practical but tidily pressed dress, and a slightly damp apron, motioned to the table located in a small eating area adjacent to the kitchen. Marin started to move in the direction of the table. Jack grabbed her arm and shook his head. "What if she's sleepwalking?" Marin whispered. "If we wake her up and she realizes two strangers are in the kitchen with her in the middle of the night, she might freak out." "Do you really think it's that simple? We both know something freaky is going on." Jack turned to the older woman. He tried to catch her eye, but she wouldn't look directly at him. "Ma'am, I'm Jack." "Yes, dear, eat your breakfast. You'll miss the school bus." The woman washed dishes as she spoke, her attention completely absorbed by the task. "Where's Milton?" Jack had directed the question quietly to Marin, but it caught the woman's attention. "Milton?" The woman Jack was beginning to think might be Mrs. Milton wiped her hands on her apron and turned in Jack's direction. "Milton shouldn't miss breakfast." "I'll just fetch him quickly." Marin headed back the way they'd come. Jack cleared his throat. Mrs. Shit. What was Milton's last name?" We're not your children. Do you understand that? I'm Jack and..." Marin paused in the doorway when Jack pointed to her. "This is my colleague, Marin." The woman paused, her hands bunched in her apron, with a blank look on her face. And then her face changed, like she'd just woken. "Of course you're not my children. You're guests. Mr. Spirelli +1. And she made eye contact for the first time. Looking at Marin, she smiled. "Would you like some breakfast?" Marin came back into the kitchen. "I'm sorry, I don't know your name. Are you Milton's wife?" Extending a hand, she smiled again, a relaxed, comfortable smile. "Rose Perrin. Yes, I'm Milt's wife." Marin shook her hand gently, as if she might break. Rose didn't look frail. She looked like a fit, active woman. But her physical appearance aside, she conveyed a sense of fragility. Marin backed a step away, giving Rose room to move about the kitchen. Already, Rose was hand-drying the dishes she'd washed earlier. "Rose." Marin waited for her to turn. "You know it's the middle of the night?" Rose slowly, carefully stacked the dish she'd dried on top of several others on the counter. Her shoulders stiffened. "No, I didn't know that." She smoothed her hair and turned around.
I'm so sorry to have disturbed your sleep. If you'll excuse me, I'll let you get back to bed.
After Rose left the kitchen, Marin tipped her head to the kitchen table.
Late night snack? That early dinner we had was a while ago.
I'll keep you company. Jack let a few minutes pass, long enough for Marin to finish her eggs. So? Marin swallowed.
These are really good. You're sure?
She pointed to his plate. Wordlessly, he handed her the plate.
I think she understood the situation enough to be embarrassed.
Marin stuffed half a slice of thick-cut bacon in her mouth. Jack watched in fascination as the rest of the bacon disappeared off the plate. How can you eat that much and not be fat? Marin wiped her mouth and placed her napkin on the table.
I don't think she was sleepwalking.
Agreed. Not that I have any evidence.
A gut feeling? Me too.
Marin stood up and pushed her chair in. Jack looked at the pristine countertops, the neatly stacked dishes on the counter, and the dishwater in the sink. I guess we should do the dishes. Marin grabbed both plates.
Yeah.
Standing side by side, him washing, her drying, Jack figured this was probably as close as they'd ever come to being friendly. Marin took the last plate from him.
Only jackasses ask women about their weight.
Okay, not so friendly.
Sorry.
Jack pulled the plug on the dishwater.
Just a friendly piece of advice. In case your dating pool broadens beyond co-eds.
Marin yawned.
What time are we meeting in the morning?
Breakfast is from 7:30 to 9, and we have an appointment with Dottie's mom, Betty Lasure, at 10. But maybe you'll want to skip.
I'm always hungry. I'll catch breakfast at 8 in case you want to meet before we leave.
Jack headed upstairs. Good. Chapter 3. Jack had eaten breakfast around 8:30 and had an awkward encounter with Milton. He'd apologized profusely for the late-night disturbance, which was fine, but there was an underlying desperate tone to the conversation. Jack suspected Rose of previous bouts of similarly disturbing behavior. If there was a magical excuse for her behavior, Jack would be thrilled to find it. And this time it wouldn't be about a paycheck.
You have a plan?
Marin asked from the driver's seat of her Range Rover. Sure. Dottie's been vocal about her suspicions, so when she told her mom she'd hired us to vet her psychic, it didn't exactly shock her. Jack turned his phone to silent. They were almost there.
But was she upset?
You tell me. When Mrs. Lasure found out we were arriving yesterday, she immediately invited us for coffee.
Strange,
Marin said, but her attention had already turned to the modest house on the right.
This is it?
Yeah, not exactly what I expected either. Dottie Wallace had possessed a sleekness, an elegance, and a huge diamond that had indicated to Jack a certain level of wealth. But her mother's home didn't fit that image. Marin pulled slowly into the drive, clearly double-checking the house number. She must have gotten the same impression of Dottie as Jack.
Huh. This is the right address.
Marin parked the car, and they both approached the house with more caution than either the tidy house or its elderly inhabitant warranted. When Betty Lasure opened the front door, Jack held back a grin. Elderly his ass. The woman who opened the door vibrated with energy, with vitality, with cheerfulness. She didn't look elderly, though she was surely well into her 70s, and she didn't look like a recent widow. Mrs. Lasure? Betty smiled warmly.
Yes, and you must be Jack Spirelli and Marin Campbell. It's nice to meet you. Please call me Betty.
She motioned for them to come inside.
I hope you've been enjoying your visit to De Rotan.
Yes, thank you. Marin led the way into the living room. The house was even smaller inside than it had appeared from the driveway, and the front door opened directly into the living room. Though small, the room was beautiful. The furnishings were sparse but elegant. Antiques, probably quite valuable. Betty invited them to sit. She'd laid out a coffee setting, complete with a silver urn and fine china. Marin sat down on the sofa Betty had indicated. "Thank you for inviting us into your home." After Betty had seated herself in a matching brocade chair, Jack sat down next to Marin. The setting, the whole situation, was a mix of casual and formal that Jack found confusing. "When my daughter told me she'd hired an investigator, I thought it best to speak with you directly. I see no reason for anything but a forthright conversation." Betty leaned forward and poured a cup of coffee for Marin. "Cream or sugar?" Marin shook her head and accepted the black coffee. "My daughter's talent for managing financial transactions doesn't extend to managing her personal relationships." Jack wasn't sure how to respond to that bomb, so when Betty turned and asked about his coffee, he had to bite back a thankful sigh. "Cream, please. Thank you." Jack shared a quick glance with Marin, just long enough to see she was equally at a loss. After pouring herself a cup and adding 2 lumps of sugar, Betty said, "You know my daughter's an attorney. She has an amazing head for numbers and did fabulously in law school." Apparently, Jack needed to make an effort to check some of his rampaging stereotyping tendencies. He most certainly did not know Dottie Wallace was an attorney. Mergers and acquisitions, tax law. Why hadn't he run his usual check on her? Not that it mattered. He just hated looking and feeling like an underprepared, ill-informed twit. Jack declined the small piece of cake Betty offered. "She's concerned that Conrad is taking advantage of you at a time when you might be vulnerable." "Do I look like I'm in a fragile, susceptible state?" Betty sipped at her coffee, giving Jack a bright, inquiring look. Marin must have thought Jack enough of an ass to actually answer that question, because she quickly intervened. "I'm sorry for the loss of your husband. Were you married long?" An inane question. The kind that popped out of a person's mouth when confronted with an uncomfortable topic like death. A blank look passed over Betty's face. It was as if the animation and liveliness of her features were stilled for a brief moment. Then she recovered. "Years. We were married for years." Marin nudged his foot, as if he was an idiot. No recently bereaved widow forgot how long she was married. "I'm sorry, Betty. When did your husband pass?" Jack quickly pulled together a few questions that he could almost reasonably ask a recently bereaved spouse. "It's almost 6 months now." Betty didn't hesitate in answering. "You're both from the Lake Charles area originally?" Marin asked. "My family has lived in Dirotan for almost 100 years." Betty took another sip of coffee, blithely ignoring the question regarding her husband's origins. Jack asked, "Where did you meet your husband? I'm sorry, what was his name?" Panic flashed across Betty's face, and her lips opened without releasing a sound. "Robert," she finally said. "My husband's name was Robert." She spoke firmly, trying to reassure herself she hadn't forgotten. "Did you attend the same school as your husband? Maybe you met there?" Marin tipped her head to the side, looking politely inquisitive. That same blank look crossed Betty's face, and then it was gone. She smiled, but it was thin. A different thing entirely from the broad, welcoming smile earlier. "That's enough about me. You're here to discuss Conrad." She folded her hands in her lap. "Conrad is a good man. He's helped me to deal with the grief of losing a loved one." The consistent shift from her husband to herself was noteworthy. and her reactions to questions about Robert were at the least strange, if not disturbing. Jack stared into his coffee. What was he saying? The woman had lost her husband. Grief expressed itself in a variety of ways. Damn, not enough information. Jack took a drink of his coffee, savored the strong, smooth flavor, and swallowed. Can you tell us something of how Conrad works? His process, you mean? Certainly. Betty immediately became more comfortable. I bring him small objects, little trinkets that remind me of my husband or that had special meaning to us as a couple. Can you give us an example? Marin's voice was low and undemanding. Betty smiled. Yes, I'm to bring his car keys. The fob was a gift on his 60th birthday. I see. And what other items have you brought? Again, that blank look. After a moment, Betty said, When I give him the object, we talk about why it's special. And Conrad uses these special items to reach your husband, to reach Robert? It's not like Conrad can speak directly with him. He gets feelings and impressions, and Conrad shares those with me. Jack placed his coffee cup and saucer carefully on the coffee table. Mrs. Lasseret, Betty, what happens to the items you give Conrad? Betty's gaze drifted away from Jack. A lighting on a clock placed on her mantel. I'm so very sorry. I have an appointment in town. If you don't have any more questions, we'll just finish up. And you can let my daughter know everything is all right. She's such a worrier. Jack and Marin both stood up. The coffee was excellent, and I appreciate you making the time to see us. Jack paused, taking a moment to scan the walls. I don't suppose you have a picture of your husband I might see? It's just that we've been speaking of him, and I'd love to see a picture of the two of you. Betty gave Jack a small, polite smile. I'm afraid they're all packed up. And before Jack could squeeze in another question, Betty had ushered them both out of the house. Marin slid into her seat and slammed the door. Staring at the car key in her hand, she said, That sweet woman's brain is Swiss cheese. She shoved the key into the ignition and started the car. But only on the subject of her husband. Jack responded grimly. You mean the one whose name she can't say? Whose name she can't even remember? Marin thumped the steering wheel with the heel of her hand. This is just wrong. And actually, we don't know she's only hazy on her husband. There could be any number of topics we didn't cover that have faded away. Marin blew hard at a piece of bright red hair that hung in her eyes. Ugh, for all we know, she has some form of dementia, and this has nothing to do with Conrad, or with magic. What about her inability to reconcile her complete confidence in Conrad with her bizarre memory loss and the apparent theft of several personal items? And her rapid mood swings? She was happy to have us, but she didn't want to discuss her husband at all. Jack grunted. What am I saying? That sounds like grief. Marin snorted. But the car keys? That con artist is making off with her husband's car, I guarantee it. I don't know. Jack rubbed his neck. I don't know. I was planning to visit Conrad, but now I'm thinking we head back to the B&B and have a serious talk with Milton. There are too many similarities between Rose's and Betty's behavior. Yeah, back to the B&B. Marin shoved her hair behind her ears, then took a breath. Right. You got it, boss. Jack did a double take. He hadn't detected even a hint of sarcasm. Chapter 4. Milton had been hesitant to talk in the house, but he'd agreed to have lunch with them in town, Lake Charles, not de Rotan, though not until 1 o'clock when his sister was available to come stay with Rose. Apparently, there was only one diner in de Rotan, and that was too public. After killing a few minutes on his computer with some fact-checking, he should have already done on his client, Jack knocked on Marin's door and told her he'd meet her at the car in 5. Once they were both seated in Marin's car, she asked, "Any reason we're leaving a half hour early?" Jack programmed Conrad's address in the GPS. "I want to run by the psychic's house and have a quick look, sniff, whatever it is you do to pick up magic signatures." He pulled out his glasses from his breast pocket. "And I'll take a look with these." "Then we're headed to Lake Charles? No lingering around the bad guy's place, right?" "That's the idea." Jack kicked back in his seat. "And don't jump to conclusions. We don't know he's a bad guy." "Sure we don't." Jack closed his eyes and leaned back against the headrest. Apparently, Marin got the hint, because she didn't say a word to him until they arrived several minutes later. "Wake up. We're here." Jack opened his eyes and cleared his throat. "Not sleeping. Reviewing the players. By the way, Dottie Wallace is a partner in a tax law firm." "Am I supposed to be surprised?" Jack shrugged. "Mom owns her house outright and has lived there for 50 years. No signs of severe financial distress. Also, I found at least a dozen addresses for Conrad just within the last 5 years, and no convictions." "He likes to move? Or he has to move?" "Excellent question." Jack pulled out his warded glasses again and put them on. "How close can we get to this guy's house without him catching our scent or tripping a ward of some kind?" "He's not lichen. I'm almost certain. Moving frequently, conning people. Sorry, probably conning people. Probably charming, comfortable with new people and new environments. That's a far cry from the typical lichen." Marin's gaze panned across the street as she spoke. "I'd agree." Jack completed his scan of the area surrounding Conrad's rental house. "I'm not seeing anything that looks like a ward." "Maybe he's your garden variety, regular human psychic with an electronic security system." "You really think that?" Jack asked. "Of course not. I'm playing devil's advocate." Marin squinted at Conrad's house, half a block away. "You asked how close we could get without tripping a ward or being scented. I don't know. Without knowing what this guy might be other than human, I just don't know." "How close to the house do you have to be to sense any kind of magical signature?" Jack worried that they'd have a replay of Mearsburg. "You're so transparent. The only reason I tripped that crazy woman's death magic ward was because I was texting my location to you, and it was a faint ward." Marin tipped her head first one direction, then the other. "So really, it was your fault I tripped it. Your plan, your fault." "Your failure in execution does not make the plan flawed. That's deeply flawed reasoning, and you know it." Marin waited. "Okay." Jack lifted both hands in surrender. "Have at it, if you think it's safe." He hesitated a moment. "If you think it's safe, I trust you." "Be still, my heart. If only I'd caught that on tape." Marin had hopped out of the car and was a few feet away before Jack could even begin to consider a response. He kept forgetting how fast she could be. He couldn't help but roll his eyes when she walked right down the sidewalk on Conrad's side of the street and past his house. She was moving at a good clip, for a human, but it still seemed needlessly reckless. She came back down the street on the opposite side of the road. The whole thing probably took less than 3 minutes, but he wanted to strangle her. "Don't get your boxers in such a twist," she said as she slid into the driver's seat. "First you blame me, then you take risks. Just drive." Jack punched the diner's address into the GPS. "If I didn't know better, Jack, I'd say you were worried." Marin pulled out onto the quiet street. "But the reason I got so close? There wasn't a hint of any magic. As you should know by now, a magic user has to actually do magic to leave a trace signature. Either Conrad's not using magic, or he's doing it strictly indoors. No traps or wards that I could detect." Marin shifted in her seat, then finally added, and I didn't smell lichen. I knew it. You huff about the difference between lichen and dragons, but I knew you guys had a nose. Marin snorted. It's better than yours, anyway. It took less than 20 minutes to reach the restaurant. Jack spent the drive sorting through the people involved in the case, considering possible motivations and estimating the likelihood of magical influences. He checked his notes, but mostly he just gave it some thought. Marin hummed. Closer than I'd thought it'd be, Jack commented as they pulled into the parking lot. This place is on the edge of town. Marin waved and smiled. There's Milton. He's a little early, too. Jack and Marin hopped out of the car, Jack pulling his laptop bag with him as he came. Slinging his bag over his shoulder, he motioned Marin ahead of him. He kept a close eye on Milton as he followed Marin inside, but all he saw was a tired old man. They were seated immediately in a booth, and the waitress greeted Milton by name. After she'd taken their drink orders, Jack leaned forward and asked, When did you start noticing problems with the reservation system?
I think you know the problem isn't our computer.
Milton clasped his hands together on the table.
My wife gets confused sometimes. She forgets who's booked, or mixes up the names of our guests. Sometimes she forgets where she is.
He looked down at his hands.
What year it is.
He glanced back up, an earnest look on his face.
But that doesn't happen very often. She usually knows the day. What happened last night, that doesn't happen very often at all. It's usually the little details that she confuses.
Has she been to the doctor? Marin asked. Milton puffed out an angry breath.
Doctors. They run a bunch of expensive tests and don't tell you anything. I keep at 'em and they say Rose is just getting old.
The waitress came back with a cup of coffee for Milton and 2 glasses of water. Milton ordered a hamburger when Marin deferred to him.
Good hamburgers here.
He gave Jack and Marin an encouraging look. Okay then, hamburgers. I'll take mine with cheese, mustard, onions, and pickle. Jack handed the waitress the single-page plastic-coated menu. I'll have the double with cheese, lettuce, tomato, and mayo. Can I get extra fries? And some onion rings? Marin must have caught Milton's surreptitious headshake. Sorry, no onion rings. I'll have the
fried pickles.
Milton smiled.
They're good.
Once the waitress had left, he said,
So many young ladies now don't like to eat a good meal.
Jack hid his grin, but Marin still kicked him under the table. I've always had a healthy appetite. It runs in the family. Jack raised his eyebrows. She wasn't that nice when I brought it up. That's because Milton is a gentleman. Marin smiled sweetly at Milton. Thanks for the pickle recommendation. Milton looked between Jack and Marin.
Have you been working together long?
When Jack replied in the negative, Milton closed his mouth and made a non-committal sound. Glancing at Marin, Jack saw she looked as clueless as him. When did you start to notice Rose's behavior change? Milton's wrinkled hands twisted together.
Well, everyone forgets the small things sometimes. A dentist appointment, where you put the keys, that kind of thing.
Maybe you noticed when she started forgetting the little things more often? Marin prompted him. It was clear the topic was difficult. A red flush rose in Milton's face.
No, I didn't. Well, not till after. She had an incident with one of the guests. It wasn't breakfast in the middle of the night, but the same idea. And then, when I started to look back, I could see there'd been a problem for several weeks.
If possible, we'd like to establish a timeline. Jack pulled a small notepad and pen from his pocket. Can you narrow down the date? His brow furrowed.
I thought you were here to investigate Conrad Blevins. I'm not sure what Rose's illness has to do with that.
Jack set his pen down. Marin and I interviewed Mrs. Lasseret this morning, and we noticed some similarities in their behavior. Milton nodded and leaned toward them. Before he could speak, the waitress returned with their orders. It took several seconds of shifting and settling before everyone had their meal and the waitress had left again. Marin shoved her plate a few inches away. You were saying about Betty and Rose and how they were having similar difficulties?
I think it's in the water.
Milton looked grim.
Something's in the water in the Rotan, and it's making people lose their memory.
Jack and Marin exchanged a glance. Marin nudged his foot, and when he didn't immediately speak, she nudged harder, so Jack asked the million-dollar question. Why do you think that the water's contaminated?
First it was Eric Miller, then Betty, and Rose was next. All in the last 6 months. All three having mental difficulties. We all live within a mile and a half from each other.
Milton looked down at his plate. He didn't look nearly as hungry as before. You know what? We can talk about this after we eat. The burgers look great, and we should try to enjoy them. Marin pulled her plate close again and picked up her burger. Milton started to say something, but changed his mind and picked up his burger. They ate in silence for several minutes until Marin spoke. The pickles are fabulous, Milton. Thank you for the recommendation. Milton looked around, then said quietly,
The onion rings aren't crunchy. They come out slimy on the inside and soggy on the outside.
Soggy is no good for onion rings. My burger tastes fabulous, almost as good as the pickles. Marin packed away another mouthful of burger. Milton wiped at the burger juice dribbling down his chin.
They make a good burger.
They finished the rest of the meal quickly. Jack hadn't realized how hungry he was until he started eating, and when he wiped his fingers after the last bite, he wanted to sit back and enjoy the afterglow of a well-cooked meal with just the right proportions of protein and grease. Milton flagged the waitress and asked for a warm-up, a good sign he was ready to talk again. I'll take a cup, Jack said. Marin added herself to the list, and a few moments later, they all had a hot cup of coffee and some privacy. If it was the water, don't you think more people would have symptoms? Jack flipped his small notebook open.
Well, the water makes a lot more sense than Conrad Blevins.
Milton gave Jack a funny look. We're not saying Blevins is responsible, Marin said. They are simply some commonalities we're trying to explain.
Well, other than the geography, Eric Miller's little girl died recently. Cancer. And Betty lost her husband. But Rose still has me, and the kids have been doing really well.
Milton shook his head.
Since you're so keen on Blevins, my Rose has seen him a few times, but not like Betty. She just wanted to see what all the fuss was about. Betty went on about him, so she set up an appointment or two.
Jack underlined Eric Miller in his notebook and made a note about Rose seeing Blevins a few times professionally. Can you tell us what happened to Eric? Milton heaved a sigh.
Eric didn't make it.
His eyes locked onto Marin's.
You can see why I'm so worried about Rose, can't you?
Very carefully, Marin asked, Are you saying that Eric Miller died recently?
Shot. In his own home. Terrible mess for his wife to find. He never would have done that if he hadn't been sick. If you knew Eric, his wife can't even go in the house. She moved back in with her mother.
Milton shook his head.
He wasn't himself, and he changed all of a sudden. Not directly after his daughter's death, but maybe 2 months later. He started to act oddly, and then he was gone.
Is there a reason you think his death is tied to the water and to Betty's and Rose's condition? Jack asked.
Sure, like I said, he lived close. And he started to act strange, confused, forgetting things, angry all the time.
Milton gave Jack another strange look.
And I definitely didn't think Conrad Blevins had anything to do with it. Eric wasn't the kind to pay a psychic. I don't know if they even knew each other. Blevins had only lived in town 6 months when little Corinne Miller passed.
Milton shook his head.
That was a terrible, terrible thing for such a little girl. May God rest her soul.
Jack waited what he thought was an appropriately respectful moment, then asked, Do you think Eric's wife might speak with us?
I don't know. First her daughter, then her husband. She's had a hard time. I'm sure she's trying to move on with her life.
Marin gave the old guy a hopeful look. Can you ask her if she'd be willing to meet with us? The request might be easier for her to hear coming from you. Milton's lips pursed.
I'll try.
Apparently, those green eyes could be persuasive when they weren't all lit up and glowing, dragon style.
You want me to call now?
Milton pulled a slick new smartphone out of his pocket. After a few murmured words of thanks from Marin, he headed outside to make the call. Jack slipped a few bills on the top of the check. What do you think? I think 3 people with Swiss cheese brains, all developed in a short period and after Conrad's arrival, in a town with fewer than 3,000 people is nuts. Marin tipped her head. No, it's batshit crazy nuts. Jack looked at his notes and went through the cast of important players. There's no tie between Blevins and Miller. That we know of. Milton wouldn't necessarily know if Eric was seeing a psychic, even though he's convinced Eric wasn't the type. I mean, what's the type? Lots of people consult with psychics. Marin waved through the window. I think Milton is done. You ready? Jack slid out of the booth and offered Marin a hand. Taking his hand, she asked quietly, You up for a grieving widow? Jack tugged a little harder than he should, and Marin gave him a look. As they emerged from the diner, Milton approached.
She'll see you, but she says to come right away, quick as you can.
Jack walked into Karen Miller's living room, trying to pick out something of her personality in the fussy, cluttered room. Thank you for seeing us. Come on in. My mom's out shopping for at least another half hour. I don't think she'd be comfortable with this, and she wouldn't understand why I'd want to talk about Eric. Karen ushered them further into the room as she spoke and gestured for them to sit. The immediacy of the appointment made sense, and at the mention of her mother, Jack recalled this wasn't Karen's home. He looked at the figurines crammed haphazardly on the mantel, then at Karen, perched on the edge of an old-fashioned recliner. Tidy hair, a crisp, sleeveless shirt, and no makeup that he could see. Not really the fussy figurine type of woman. After settling on the sofa, Jack said, It's a difficult topic. We appreciate you speaking with us. Karen made a small sound that could have been the beginning of a laugh or a sob. Jack couldn't tell. It's a relief, truly. My husband's death is like some terribly kept secret. Everyone in town knows, or thinks they know, what happened. But no one will discuss it, especially not with me. The entire town walks around pretending it never happened. Her voice was bitter, and anger bubbled just below the surface. She rubbed her forehead with her fingertips, then said, I'm moving next month. I found a job in Houston, and I'm getting out of here. It's the best thing for me. What can you tell us about your husband's death? Marin's question, although direct, was voiced in a calm, compassionate tone. It seemed to do the trick, because Karen answered without hesitation. "It was always about our daughter." Karen smiled, as if a happy memory played out in her mind, but her smile quickly faded. "Corin was sick a long time. By the time she—" Karen drew a sharp, hiccuping breath. It took her a moment before she started to speak again. "By the time Corin left us, Eric and I thought we'd be prepared. We'd known for so long that she wasn't going to make it, but all the preparation, the counseling, it doesn't seem much when your child dies. The first few months were a terrible time for both of us, but then he seemed to be doing better. He joined a support group. I wasn't ready, but he said it was helping." Karen paused, not overcome by grief that Jack could tell. She simply sat on the edge of the recliner, showing no strong emotion at all. It was then that Jack first noticed that her clothes were just a little too big, and her eyes had purplish shadows that had defied her attempts to mask them with makeup. When she spoke again, Karen's voice was measured and even. "I found him holding her picture one night, crying, and she said he couldn't remember. It didn't make much sense to me at the time. He would ask me to talk about her, to tell him stories, and I couldn't. It was just too soon." She stopped suddenly. "It was a week or two before I could see that he couldn't remember significant events. Not small things, though that would have been bad enough. Important events, things I'd never imagined he could forget. He could no longer recall. Corin's first dance recital, her ballerina Halloween costume, how excited she was when we went to the petting zoo and she met the baby goats." Jack and Marin both waited, neither eager to interrupt. Karen was taking this opportunity, one that had been denied to her by her friends and family, to sort through events, and to say out loud what must have been in her mind for some time now, and Jack wasn't about to stem the flow. Karen fiddled with the fussy lace coverings on the arms of her chair. Eventually, she continued. "I thought that was his way of dealing with the grief, and I was so angry." Karen's eyes got wide and she looked straight at Jack. "But that can't be right, because he didn't want to forget. Really didn't want to forget. When he realized some of his memories were slipping away, it made him even more upset. He desperately wanted to remember." She sighed quietly, the barest hint of audible exhalation. "He kept a note. I burned it. Didn't want anyone to see it." "Do you remember what the note said?" Karen turned toward Jack, but it was a moment before her eyes focused on him. "He said he was sorry, and that he couldn't stand to lose any more of Corin. That's all." There was no question about the cause of death? The question had left his lips before Jack realized how inappropriate it was. He could have kicked himself. It was like something clicked in her brain, and Karen asked them, "Why did you want to know about Eric?" "Milton didn't say, just that it would be helpful if I didn't mind discussing what happened to Eric with you." "Rose Perrin and Betty Lasseret are both suffering from memory loss," Jack said. "Betty's condition, much like your husband's, may be limited to memories of one person." "Her husband passed from heart problems, I believe, less than a year ago," Karen said. "Is that who—" Jack murmured a quiet agreement, which triggered a perplexed look from Karen. "But I don't really see why Eric's death would have anything to do with either of them. Rose and Betty are both older than my grandmother. Aren't memory problems normal for really old people?" Really old? Betty and Rose weren't that much older than Jack, younger than his parents. He didn't think 40 was particularly old, but right now he felt the weight of each year. Losing cognitive function can happen as we age, but the symptoms in Betty's case are very similar to what happened to your husband. Very similar, Marin said. So similar that we're trying to determine if there might have been a related cause for both of them. Karen's brow furrowed. I don't think I understand. Psychological problems aren't contagious, are they? No, it's nothing like that. Jack tried not to wince. Just what they needed. The whole town to pick up on Milton's contaminated water theory. And he still hadn't asked about Conrad. Shit. We're simply reviewing some trends and trying to find some common factors. Yes. For example, do you know if your husband used a psychic's services? Marin, the clever girl, had picked up what he was after. Or had his palm read or a tarot reading? Shaking her head firmly, Karen said, No, definitely not. He thought all of that was silly. Although, I do wonder if he changed his mind a little. Not that he believed, but after he met that new man. Conrad Blevins? Jack asked. That's right. He met Conrad in grief counseling. I can't imagine Eric ever believing in psychics, but he wasn't bothered that Conrad believed in spirits and all that. Jack heard the mechanical sound of the garage opening. Quickly, he asked. They were friends? Karen tipped her head at the sound of the garage door opening. Jack asked again. Eric and Conrad were friends? Yes, I suppose they were. They shared their grief in a way that Eric and I couldn't. That much sadness brings some people together, but it tears others apart. Karen glanced toward the back of the house again and rose from her seat. I'm sorry, but it's probably best if you leave now, and I don't know how else I can help you. Of course. Marin stood and pulled on Jack's arm until he was following her. They managed to miss Karen's mom on the way out. Marin dragged Jack along the drive. Hurry up. What has you in such a snit? If we can get in the car and down the drive before Karen's mom sees us, then she can tell her mother whatever she likes. For whatever reason, that poor woman doesn't want to explain our visit to her mother. Before she hopped in the driver's seat, Marin gave Jack a significant look and added, It's the least we can do. Right. But he was talking to Air. Marin was giving him a hurry-up look from the driver's seat. Damn. He really was feeling old today. Chapter 5. You're sure this is a good idea? Marin asked for the second time since Jack had told her Conrad's house was the next stop. No. We have no idea how he does whatever it is he does. Marin continued driving to Conrad's, even as she pointed out what an incredibly poor choice that might be. Sometimes, Marin was a halfway decent employee. Whatever it is he does? How about stealing people's souls? Marin shot him a sidelong glance. That's a little melodramatic. Jack stared out the passenger window, considering her accusation. Bullshit. Not at all. He rips away those things that make us who we are, our experiences, our memories, and all the emotions that go along with them. If that's not stealing someone's soul, then, well, it's stealing something just as vital. Someone has to stop him. I agree, but maybe we do a little research first. Jack snorted. Right. You have an expert on soul-sucking psychics. He shot her an annoyed look. And that was when he caught it. Uncertainty. You do? You actually have an expert? Who do you know and why aren't we reaching out? Silence. Pull over, Marin. Marin sighed and pulled the car over to the shoulder. I know IPPC has nothing. I sent Harrington an update after our midnight meeting with Rose. Harrington's the cog that keeps everything turning in that organization. If IPPC had any information, he would know about it and have at least passed on a warning by now. Reluctantly, Marin turned to Jack, hands still on the wheel. IPPC may not, but my dad might know something. Your father works for IPPC, so isn't that the same difference? Marin laughed. Sure, like Dad sitting down with some tech and cataloging hundreds of years of experiences. I don't see that happening anytime soon. He's security, not a walking database. She shook her head slightly, but I'm sure he's helpful enough when he can be. So? Marin pinched the bridge of her nose. So, give me a second. Dad and I aren't exactly tight right now. She scrunched her eyes shut. And it's not like he's a walking encyclopedia of rare magical talents. Jack knew something was up between her and her father, but he hadn't asked. Didn't want to be involved because his own family drama was more than enough for him. Well, shit. Do we need to talk about it? Marin opened her eyes. Distracted, she looked at her phone but didn't pick it up. What? Do you want to talk about whatever it is that's going on with you and your dad? Marin gave him a perplexed look. Not really. Not now. She took a deep breath and blew it out. Then she picked up her phone and dialed. Hi. Yeah. Quick question. What do you know about magic that steals memory? Marin tilted her head so she could hold the phone against her shoulder, then reached across Jack for a pad and a pen in her glove box. No, not total amnesia, and still walking and talking. She jotted a few notes down. Yeah, selective memory loss. She turned to Jack and asked, happy or childlike demeanor, or more confused? Confused, right? Marin tipped the phone slightly so Jack's answer would get picked up. Jack reviewed his interactions with Betty and Rose and what Karen had told them about Eric. One confused victim, one angry victim, but we've got one who's more distant. None of them have what I'd consider a happy or childlike demeanor. Two are missing memories of recently deceased family members. Marin made a few more notes, then her lips thinned. Well, yes, of course. But do you know any way to counteract? Her nostrils flared. I get it, but if you've not got anything useful... She scribbled on her pad again. Jack caught her attention before she could end the call. He might be using and keeping personal items from his victims. Did you hear that? Yes. Marin's eyes got all squinty. I'll make sure not to hand him any tokens, Dad. I get it. Gotta run. Marin blew at a stray wisp of bright red hair. Ah, hi to Heike. And she quickly ended the call. She closed her eyes, leaned back against the headrest, and let out a long, low groan. Family. From Jack's perspective of the conversation, Ewan had been helpful and hadn't asked a lot of unrelated questions. But Jack wasn't going anywhere near that landmine. He glanced at her notepad but couldn't make anything out. Didn't you learn to write like 80 years ago? Marin turned to look at him. What are you talking about? Shouldn't you have good handwriting? I thought that was a thing back then. When she just stared at him like he'd lost his mind, he looked away from the scraggly, indecipherable scratches on the pad she was holding and asked, What do we know? Definite exclusion of a few possibilities, and through elimination, he's got a best guess. Marin shrugged. I told you, it's not like he has an encyclopedia of weird and wonderful creatures. Also, Dad's memory is decent, but you have to remember that dragons are very much creatures of the now. Yeah, I remember you told me about that whole concept of living in the moment. Something to do with how long you guys live, right? Marin nodded. So that leaves us with a disturbing prospect. Dad called it a created man. Think Frankenstein or a golem. She pulled back onto the road. Are you telling me that Conrad has a partner? A creator? Jack grabbed her discarded notepad. Technically, assuming he's this created man Dad was talking about, but these created men, they don't wander the countryside stealing memories if their creators are still hanging around. The creator's life, memories, magic, or something keeps the thing alive. But if the creator dies, good lord, some egomaniac creates his own personal human Gumby servant and then forgets to flip the off switch before he dies. Jack chucked the useless notes into the glove box. Yeah, basically. Although Conrad is focusing on specific memories, which is apparently not the norm. Well, assuming there is a norm. So we've probably got a vessel, previously powered by his master's magic, with a dying battery that he somehow recharges by stealing memories from grieving humans. Don't forget Rose. Actually, Rose's symptoms are what Dad described, the confusion about time and place, something like non-specific senility. So the bereaved victims are unique to Conrad. Oh, and tokens are important to some created men. Marin gripped the steering wheel. I think it's a terrible idea to go to Conrad's without some kind of plan. Since you're driving 10 miles under the speed limit, we should have plenty of time. And there's some urgency here. The active attacks on Betty and Rose, combined with the fact that we don't know how exactly he's causing the damage or if it's reversible, all of that means now is better than later. And we don't really want him prepared for us, do we? Jack scrubbed his hands over his face. So how do we kill this thing? And we're not calling him the created man. That sounds goofy as hell. He's basically a golem, so golem. A golem is a subtype, and that's probably not what Conrad is. Marin must have caught Jack's eye roll, because she quickly added, but sure, golem works. And? And no idea. Chop his head off, burn him, maybe he dies just like any other person. Dad didn't know, which is why he insisted I be careful. He's your dad. What do you expect? Hey, I'm just saying. Jack lifted his hands. Okay, our next stop is the hardware store. Marin's lips curved into a hint of a smile. Yippee! Axes, duct tape, lamp oil, and a shovel. Here we come. It's disturbing how quickly you came up with that shopping list. And that made her grin outright. One murder kit, check. One body disposal kit, check. Escape car gassed up, check. I feel like a well-prepared criminal. Marin dropped the last bag into the rear of her Rover and slammed the rear hatch. Why don't you announce that a little louder? Jack waited until they were both seated inside the car before he said, I'd love to spend the rest of my life in jail for killing a mass murderer who's not even human. Potential mass murderer. We don't have a body count, but the sudden disappearance or death of Mr. Blevins is an issue. We're clearly the prime suspects if something happens to him, new to town, digging around his clients, and purchasing a variety of suspicious materials immediately before his death. Marin tapped her fingers on the steering wheel. I think a house fire. Jack tamped down all too vivid images of buildings, homes, aflame. Are you kidding? We could light up the whole town, or at least the neighborhood. Really, Jack? Magical fire, dragon, remember? Marin turned and blew a small puff of smoke in front of Jack's face. And we've had an unusual amount of rain lately. Damp, warm air touched his face. Steam, not smoke. That's creepy as hell, but I get it. You have excellent control. He waited a few seconds, then said, a little heavy-handed. Marin smirked. What's the plan, boss? Arrive, subdue, remove the head, burn the body, burn the house. Jack couldn't help but cringe at the house burning, magically controlled or not. What do you think? Are you actually asking my opinion? Give me a second to recover from the shock. My mistake. It won't happen again. But the words slipped out with no conviction. Just something to say as he thought about Marin himself, their professional relationship. Yeah, something needed to change, and he didn't want a repeat of Mearsburg. Jack cleared his throat. Yeah. So? Marin peeked at him out of the corner of her eye. Don't let him have anything that belongs to us. Tokens are important to created, golems, whatever that means. I'm betting they help him steal memories. Or give him power over the token's owner, or are just trophies he keeps to remind him of past successes. Whatever, best to avoid dealing with it, so hang on to your stuff. Jack grunted in agreement. We can't forget how much everyone likes this guy. He must be charming. It's possible he's literally charming his victims, that he has a magic talent that influences how people feel about him. Jack groaned. Right. Marin's lips twitched. In theory, I should be immune, or at least less affected. Well, that's good anyway, because if he has super strength or some kind of physical advantage, like not being alive and therefore impossible to kill? Smartass. Yes, like that. You're the obvious one to get close and try to immobilize him, since you've got the super strength and lightning speed. Jack had a gut-churning thought. So if Conrad is a vessel for his master's magic, how exactly did his creator make him? Not the golem, the vessel. We're almost there, so I'm circling the neighborhood before we head in. Marin made an immediate right turn a few streets before Conrad's. The simple answer? His creator took some poor soul's body and repurposed it. If that's true, then we forget taking his head. We immobilize him and incinerate his body. No body, no vessel for whatever the hell it is that makes Conrad alive. Jack nodded. All right. We walk in, overpower him, gag him and tie him, and then burn him, without giving him a chance to talk or touch us. Those are the most common vehicles for persuasive talent, Marin added. Or letting him take a personal object from either of us. Jack dug around in his pockets and dumped out the change, a small pocket knife, and his wallet. He stashed the wallet and knife in the glove box. We're parking and knocking on his door? No, that gets him too close. In through the back, and we try to surprise him. Jack reached down to check his ankle holster and gun, preferably before he calls the cops. If we could not get stopped by the police at any point today, that would be great, especially since I'm carrying concealed. You're worried about a concealed weapon? Marin snorted. If he calls the cops and then ends up dead, no accidental house fire, that's a much bigger problem. Yeah, that too. Marin pulled into a small neighborhood park. From there, they could easily walk to the house that abutted Conrad's. No way in without being seen now. We wait till dark, I assume? Yep. Should only be an hour or so. I'd say wait until he's asleep. But for all we know, he doesn't sleep. Marin's brow furrowed. And Rose's nighttime adventure in the kitchen makes me wonder if he has a way to reach them at night. Jack nodded. As soon as it's dark, then. Chapter 6. Jack gave Marin's ass a firm push. He'd given her a leg up over the fence, but she'd looked about ready to drop back down. Once she'd cleared the fence, he clambered over behind her and saw why she'd hesitated. A stout rose bush, thorns included, was just on the other side. He shimmied several feet down the fence, then hopped off. Thankfully, Louisiana in the summer meant all the houses in this little neighborhood were locked up tight, with the curtains pulled and air conditioning units running full blast. So, with only a little luck, no nosy neighbors to stumble on them. And Conrad's house only had lights on upstairs. Jack could just make out the faint outline of yellow in one room where the light leaked through the corners of the curtains. "Thanks," Marin whispered in Jack's ear when he reached her. Jack shrugged and motioned to the back door. As he watched, Marin approached the door and disappeared. He squinted in the dark. He thought the weird steam breath was creepy. Marin disappearing into nothing made the hairs on the back of his neck rise. Before he could go completely mental, Marin quietly opened the back door and motioned him inside. He'd have to figure out why walking through a door was freakier than walking through a ward, but his brain had decided that it absolutely was. Once inside, he could hear the low hum of a television in the background, just enough noise to mask any small noises he and Marin might make. Or not. Because Conrad was headed down the stairs. Jack could hear him. Conrad wasn't making any attempt to move quietly. The guy was whistling. Had they tripped a ward unknowingly? Or an armed security system that neither he nor Marin had spotted? They both moved to the back of the room and to the side, the spot least visible to a person descending the stairs. Jack reluctantly drew his gun. They needed to avoid the sound of gunfire if their original accidental house fire plan was going to work. But he also liked breathing. Jack pointed at Marin. She was their only silent option at this point. Jack just had to make sure he didn't hit her if that plan failed, because he'd be poorly placed for a clean shot. And then there he was, their very own ninja memory assassin. A slightly receding hairline, soft in the middle, average height. Conrad looked like he worked behind a desk all day. He looked like that guy, Bob, the one who grills burgers for the block party and waves at passers-by when he's working in the yard. He looked like every man and no one in particular. While he'd been cataloging Conrad's appearance, Jack's gun had slowly lowered and the muzzle now pointed at the ground. He didn't remember deciding to lower it. Marin approached Conrad, but slowly. That wasn't the plan. Jack knew it, but he wasn't really concerned about it. As Marin slowly closed the distance between her and Conrad, she said, "Jack, why do I not want to smash this walking piece of excrement's face in?" Marin sounded curious, not frantic, so there must not be any urgency. "I don't know, but I'm feeling like he might be kind of a good guy." Jack paused. That wasn't right. "I'm a really nice guy. You should get to know me before you make any hasty decisions." Conrad smiled. Pleasantly, his bland expression matching his bland tone. "Jack, why don't you give me your gun?" "Sure." Jack started to walk toward Conrad. Wait, bad idea. Really bad idea. "No, I think that might be a bad idea." Was that his voice? It sounded wrong to his own ears. "I'm sure you're right," Conrad said. "Go ahead and shoot the redhead instead. I think that's a good idea." "Okay." The words slipped past Jack's lips, but he didn't move. Shooting the redhead seemed like an even worse idea than giving Conrad his gun. No, he really shouldn't shoot Marin. He kind of liked Marin. Then his arm was wrenched and the pain brought a moment of clarity. "Shit!" "Yes." Marin held tight to his forearm and yanked him along behind her. "You going to shoot me?" "Hell no!" Jack looked over his shoulder. "Conrad's headed to the garage." Marin pulled him through the back door. "Let go!" Jack pulled at his arm. "I'm fine." As they hoofed it across the yard and Marin made a run at the fence, pulling herself over in a smooth move, Jack had a fleeting thought. Were they retreating or being chased? After holstering his gun, Jack joined her, huffing slightly on the other side of the fence. No curious neighbors yet. Right before she took off again, Marin said, "We're agreed that you shoot him if you get the opportunity?" "Yeah." Jack jogged at a good clip, just keeping pace with Marin. "Wouldn't have shot you." Reaching the car, Marin tugged open the driver's door and hopped in. Jack was a hair behind her. After he closed the door, Jack repeated, "Whatever I said, I wouldn't have shot you." "I know that, but it's pretty damn disturbing that Conrad's persuasion is that effective from such a distance." Marin pulled out into the street. "Those poor women didn't have a chance. And Eric, ugh, I want to beat this creature to a pulp." "It would be pretty cool if you could manage that. Maybe earplugs?" Because Jack knew they had to finish this tonight. That, or Marin and he could easily become Conrad's next victims. Or he'd skip town and continue harming innocent people who caught his eye. "Do you think he's running?" Marin checked her rearview mirror. "Nope, definitely chasing. And I can tell you, his persuasion is tied to proximity, and it's definitely not his voice. Visual, a smell, hormones of some kind. The magic is dense near him and dissipates further away, but there's no fluctuation when he speaks. Hell, it may not even be a natural talent. He could be using borrowed magic, a potion maybe. I can't tell. The magic just looks off." As Marin shared what she'd discovered, Jack watched a green Subaru gain on them. The same green Subaru that had been parked in Conrad's drive earlier. "Do I want to know how fast you're going?" Jack slipped his seatbelt on. "Nope. At least there's no traffic." Marin continued to check her rearview mirror with startling frequency. "I'd love to avoid a car accident. I'm squishy and breakable, remember? No magical bells and whistles. No extra healing ability." "Then it's a good thing our buddy Kai lives around the corner." Marin gave him one of her toothy, mildly terrifying grins. "You remember Kai? The healer who magicked your head back into reasonable shape? After your concussion? After I almost blew us up. Right, I remember. It was like, what, 2 weeks ago? Of course I remember." Jack had forgotten the kid's name, not that he'd patched Jack up. "He's close?" "Yeah, closer to us than to Mearsburg." Marin gripped the steering wheel. "I think Conrad is going to run us off the road and either kill us or have us kill each other." Since he'd reached the same conclusion, Jack couldn't argue. Bad news, because that means he's not worried about any injuries he might sustain. Yep. The car jerked as the Subaru tapped their bumper, but Marin had already accelerated. "Shit! Sharp turn coming up ahead." Jack struggled for a half-assed decent out. "A good chance you survive a collision with this asshole?" "Very good." Quickly now, Jack said, "Slow down for the turn as much as you can, and I'll jump out." "He'll rear-end me, and you'll shoot him after the crash." "That's the plan." Marin squeezed the steering wheel. "Wait till I say go." "You're sure?" "I am." "Damn it. I love this car," Jack muttered. Marin smiled broadly. "I know. I'll get another one. Get ready." She braked hard. Jack did his best to think only. Exhale. Relax. He cracked the door open. Exhale. Relax. They slowed down significantly, probably to 20 or 15 miles an hour. He could survive that, right? "Go!" Jack let himself fall from the car, exhaling as he went. Burning, wrenching, rolling. Panicky gasps of breath. Relax and roll. Relax and roll. And he rolled and burned and rolled. It took him a moment to realize he was stationary and just his head was spinning. Immediately, he tried to even out his breath. Slowly reaching for his ankle holster, he scanned the area as best as he could from the ground. Minimal movement should make him less visible, he hoped. The Range Rover was off the road but upright. Jack couldn't see if Marin was in the front seat. The country road they'd ended up on had no streetlights, and the headlamps from the Subaru shone at an angle to the Rover. No movement near Conrad's car. Jack searched the wreckage of the car for any sign of Conrad, but from his position on the ground he couldn't see much. Jack had been at least 15 feet from Conrad when the guy had half convinced him to pull a gun on Marin. Massive adrenaline dump, road rash, a jacked shoulder, fear. He couldn't count on accuracy at 100 feet. 50? Could he risk getting that close? Jack did a few calculations, then rolled to his feet and ran to the Rover, a good 100 feet from the Subaru. Conrad must have clipped the left edge of the Rover's bumper in the turn, spinning the cars away from each other. The thought slipped through his head, crammed together with the ache in his shoulder, the sharp pain in his hip, and the slow burn down his back. Marin was in the car, slumped slightly to the side. Shit. Jack kept half an eye on Conrad's car, while he tried to get to Marin. Marin, can you hear me? Marin cleared her throat. I'm okay, but you've got a hitch in your step. She coughed. Freaking airbag fumes. Hey, relax. Conrad hasn't left the car. You sure? When she nodded, Jack said, You didn't black out? Screw you too. I'm sure. Now get me out of this cloud of chemicals. Jack opened the door and gave her a hand out. It took her a few seconds before she was steady on her feet. I haven't seen any movement around the car, but I can't see him. Marin sneezed. Eyes watering, she said, The bastard's still in the front seat. Maybe his legs are broken. Are you sure you're okay? Jack couldn't help but notice the wheezing, sneezing, and tearing up. You take care of you. I'm fine. Jack rubbed his bruised hip absently. I can't shoot him if I can't see him, and no way am I getting close. A pleasant thought perked him up. Can you just incinerate the car? We're in the middle of nowhere. Before Marin could respond, Conrad's clear and even voice resonated through the air. Burn me, and their memories are gone forever. Jack checked that Marin still looked like herself, still was in control of herself. Are you feeling compelled? Marin shook her head and quietly murmured, But I'm not quite up to flying and fire at the moment. She did look paler than she had a few moments ago, and she was sweating. Marin didn't sweat. Something was wrong. Shit. Raising his voice, Jack said, Okay, what do you want? He tried to sound reasonable, but even to his own ears he sounded pissed off. Conrad's car door swung open, followed by the appearance of his legs, clearly not broken. I want what every man wants, to live free, unmolested by my fellow man. Are you fucking kidding me? But Jack spoke quietly. He counted to 3 and then raised his voice. And what about the people you molest? Your victims? The old, the weak, unmissed by society when they fade away. Where's the harm? Calm, dispassionate, Conrad's reply made Jack queasy. Jack! Marin was leaning against the Rover. His master. Immediately, Jack turned around and yelled, What about your creator? Is that what he believed? That people were there for you to take? That the weakest were there for you to abuse, to injure, to kill? Conrad stood smoothly from the car, fluidly turning to present a minimized target. But Jack, I don't kill. Fucking asshole. No center mass target. Jack grabbed frantically at the last thread of the conversation. Eric. What about Eric? Soothingly, Conrad said, Eric killed himself. He was weak, unhappy, ready to die. Not weak, Conrad. He was in pain. Pain that you caused. Jack raised his gun and fired.
If you shoot, you shouldn't miss.
Conrad took a casual step toward Jack and Marin, appearing completely unruffled by the near miss.
Don't you want to save Rose's sanity? Betty's memories of the love of her life? Shame on you.
He took another step. Doubt crept in. Could they get Betty's memories back? Rose's too? Jack glanced at Marin. Lips trembling, forehead beaded with sweat, Marin said,
He lies. He's using persuasion, Jack.
By the time he'd turned back to Conrad, the creature was several feet closer. Jack fired, clipping his shoulder, but Conrad kept walking.
His creator, Jack,
Marin wheezed.
The man who made you.
Jack searched frantically for some argument, something to distract.
He's ashamed, Conrad.
Conrad hesitated for a split second. Bingo. Conrad continued to walk forward. He was maybe 70 feet away.
You're wrong. They nourish me, and he would want me to live. If you knew my father, you would know this.
He wasn't your father. He was your creator. He was human, like I am, like Betty and Rose and Eric. You're not human, Conrad. Jack spat out the last sentence like an accusation and fired. A miss. His fucking shoulder was killing him, making it impossible to get a steady aim. Conrad cocked his head, seeming to consider Jack's statement.
I'm better than human. I don't age. I don't tire or become sick. I'm not weak.
Jack made a quick guess. Everyone without a soul wanted one, right? And surely this thing, whatever it was, didn't have a soul. But you can never be better than humans because you have no soul. No reaction. So Jack switched tracks. Your creator had a soul.
Yes, and he shared his soul with me.
Conrad was about 50 feet away. An easy enough shot on any other day. Jack dropped his gun hand. His shoulder couldn't take it, and this wasn't working. So when your creator, your father, died, he took away your soul. Conrad turned to face Jack, and the hate in his eyes burned. He shouldn't have. One shot, center mass, silenced him. Jack stared down the sight of the gun he'd raised and fired without conscious thought. Already his feet were moving, bringing him closer. He fired again, heart, and again, head. The last remaining shot he fired through the shredded remains of what passed for this creature's heart. 7 shots. Looked like Conrad was just human enough to die. Jack leaned down, about to check its pulse when he realized, did the thing have a pulse to begin with? On the way back to the car, he picked up his shell casings, but his gaze never strayed far from the crumpled figure of Conrad. Where was all the blood? Whatever Conrad had been, it didn't seem to bleed much. He picked up the last casing and turned to find Marin crumpled in a heap next to the car, pale, damp, unconscious. Shit. Jack rushed to her side and reached down to feel for a pulse. Marin's eyelids flickered.
Please, get a grip, Jack.
She wheezed and coughed.
I'm not dying.
She stopped to catch her breath.
I pierced a lung. It hurts like crazy.
Holy shit. That is not good. Marin's eyes were now firmly open, and she looked pissed off. She narrowed her eyes.
My phone. Call Kai. You idiot.
Right, got it. Jack retrieved her phone from the rover and scrolled through the contacts. There was only one Kai, and he had a Louisiana number. He dialed the number and flipped it immediately to speaker. Hey, it's Jack. The guy...
Yeah, I remember. The guy with the head injury. Any reason you're calling from Marin's phone?
Kai asked. Well, that was interesting. Before Jack could map out the various reasons for Kai to have Marin's number programmed in his phone, Marin started wheezing. Hey! Marin started coughing immediately, which made tears stream down her face. Jesus, can you shut up for 5 minutes? Jack barked. Immediately, a sharp pang of remorse hit. It wasn't her fault he had nasty, inadequate, and helpless feelings piled on top of guilt. His idea to intentionally crash the car, but he still wanted to throw the phone at her. Jack grunted in frustration. Sorry, Kai. Marin's punctured a lung and needs help right now. The faster you can get here, the better, because she won't stop talking. He took a breath, briefly meeting her eyes. And she looks like shit, and definitely is in a lot of pain. Already in the car and heading down the drive. Where am I going? Kai's words were confirmed by the soft dinging of the seatbelt warning bell in the background. After Jack gave him directions, Kai said, Just keep her still and quiet. I'll be there in 15. Jack ended the call and pocketed Marin's phone. Not a word. She glared at him but didn't utter a sound. She did, however, bite the hell out of her lower lip. It seemed like a never-ending 15 minutes to Jack, as he waited for someone, somewhere, to have heard the shots and come to investigate, or for another traveler to venture down this back road and report the accident before they could clean up the scene. He could only imagine how rough it was for Marin, in pain, worried about discovery, and just dying to tell him how to deal with the cleanup. 13 minutes later, Kai pulled up in his old Wrangler. Kai jumped out and jogged to Marin. At least I know why you guys weren't coming to me. That's a serious shame about the Range Rover. Right, Jack said. I'm going to miss that truck. Marin glared at both of them. It didn't take Kai long to heal Marin sufficiently so that she could talk without excessive pain. She stretched, grimaced, and then said, Don't worry. I'll incinerate the whole mess. Jack must have looked confused because she immediately explained. This is what you've been sitting here stressing out about for the last 20 minutes, right? Jack winced. No comment. Marin snorted. I get it. Turning to Kai, she asked, You can get the tear repaired, right? The rest is fine. I just need the lung intact before I set fire to that corpse over there. Kai sighed. I was trying really hard not to notice the 300-year-old corpse. Thanks for the reminder. What the hell? Are you serious? Jack looked back at the heap of clothing and twisted limbs that used to be Conrad. Sure, I mean, it looks fresh, and I don't want to know how that happened, but he's definitely at least 300 years past his sell-by date. Kai turned back to work on Marin. Without looking up, he said, Really? I don't want to know. Got it. Jack glanced discreetly at his watch. I'm almost done. Kai's lips twitched. Maybe 5 more minutes. This lady has enough juice to heal worse injuries to a critter 5 times her size. Cute, Marin said. Are you saying you're using Marin's magic to heal her wound? Jack watched the two of them with curiosity. Yeah, that's why you guys, non-magical people, are harder. No juice but my own involved. Kai gave Marin a serious look. Deep breath. When she'd complied, he asked, How does that feel? Marin gave Kai a glowing smile. Much better than just patching the tear. Thank you. Jack pulled his gaze away from 300-year-old Conrad and said, Yes, thank you. I hope we didn't wreck your entire evening. Kai grinned. Are you kidding? You guys are the only excitement I get. I was thinking about moving closer to New Orleans, but if you keep this up, I'll start to feel almost useful. Marin stood up and offered Kai her hand. Glad to provide entertainment, and thanks again. Kai pulled her close for what looked like a friendly, but not overly friendly hug. Stay safe. He lifted a hand in Jack's direction and headed back to his jeep. Wait till he's gone, then blow the whole thing up into unrecognizable bits? Jack asked hopefully. Marin huffed out a small laugh. Don't you wish? We call the locals and report the accident. But I think incinerating the body is a good idea. Who knows what an autopsy would reveal? He hits us. We were confused. By the time we got out of the car, he was gone. Jack shrugged. Maybe. I need the body away from the scene, somewhere that a char mark won't be noticed. The woods. Jack started to head in Conrad's direction, but stopped when his hip protested. Shit, why didn't I hit him up for a little healing boost? Because you were so worried about me. Marin towed him along behind her as she headed to collect Conrad's body. Or you forgot how much you hurt because you'd been still in one place for so long. Yeah, not to burst your bubble, but once I realized you weren't dying, so, definitely the second one. Jack braced himself to pick up the body. I get a warm bath after this. Promise me, please. And no teasing if I break down into tears. I'm laughing my ass off if you cry. They bantered back and forth the entire trip to the woods, each of them desperately clinging to any topic but the lifeless creature they carried. Once the body was safely burned, the cops called and the accident reported. 2 hours had passed. The police had been suspicious. Conrad was, not surprisingly, well liked. But when it came right down to it, he wasn't a local. And Marin and Jack hadn't done anything wrong from what the officer could see. It was clear the Range Rover had been rear-ended. After Marin passed a breathalyzer, and both she and Jack had emphatically refused medical treatment, they both piled into the cab of the tow truck and hitched a ride to the B&B with the driver. It wasn't until the tow truck was pulling away that Jack realized he and Marin hadn't discussed what they'd tell Milton, and Rose, and Betty, and Dottie, or if they'd tell Karen anything at all. He scrubbed his hands over his face. I desperately want that soak in a bath. Yeah, but there's no better time to check out Conrad's house than now. No way is that officer gaining access this evening. Damn it, you're right. Jack closed his eyes and let his head roll back. Ow! Your neck hurts too? Jack sighed. Apparently. All right, let's head in. And if Milton's up, we spill the beans tonight. Otherwise, we do it tomorrow after a decent night's sleep. What the hell are we going to tell him? The truth, I think. It's not much crazier than someone contaminating the water supply. Marin shrugged. It's just a question of whether we say magic, hypnosis, drugs, or something else. Karma is a complete bitch. Jack smiled weakly. Marin tipped her head quizzically. That call to your dad that I pushed you to make? I'm making my own uncomfortable little call. Harrington is going to make the call on magic, drugs, hypnosis, or something else. Oh. Marin shot Jack a sympathetic look. That sucks. Chapter 7. Drugs, hypnosis, memory loss, and cover-ups. Not the conversation Milton had likely expected when he'd come down to check on the late arrivals. The tow truck lights had woken him up when they'd flashed through his bedroom window. Milton sat very still, wrapped in his bathrobe, his hand clenched around a mug of herbal tea. So you're saying that he drugged Rose and used hypnosis to make her forget certain things? Why would he do that? Because he's sick, Milton. Really sick. But he's gone now. Jack and I made sure he couldn't keep hurting people. Marin looked so earnest that even Jack was starting to buy the story. And, really, most of it was true. I don't understand why the police aren't involved. What am I supposed to do to help her get better? What do I tell the doctors? Milton's worried gaze dug at Jack. Here was the tricky part. Like I said, Jack and I aren't with the police, but we work with a law enforcement agency out of Europe, where Blevins has committed similar crimes. That agency has contacts with the FBI and Interpol, and we've been authorized to provide you with the name of a representative from each of those organizations. Marin pulled out her phone and carefully copied the names of two people and their phone numbers. If you have any questions, you can ask either of these two people, but it's quite important that you only speak with these people. She gave him a soft, compassionate look. Do you understand?
I understand what you're saying, but I'm not sure I understand why.
Milton took a sip of the now cold tea. When Marin was about to explain further, he shook his head.
No, I don't care. I just need to know what I can do for Rose.
Jack leaned back in his chair and clasped his hands together. The good news is that Rose isn't sick. The memories are gone, but you can tell her stories, share your memories, and fill in the gaps. We also think that her confusion will diminish over the next few weeks now that Conrad isn't actively interfering with her perception of time. An educated guess that he and Marin had made, something had made Rose's symptoms different from Eric's and Betty's. Milton's bushy gray eyebrows pulled close together.
And if it doesn't?
Then you can call one of the contacts we've given you, and they'll help you, Jack said. He suspected that the FBI or Interpol contact would have Kai or another healer come by to check on Rose. Milton shook his head.
So she won't remember, but she doesn't have Alzheimer's. That's good news.
His whole body relaxed into the kitchen chair.
Really good news.
Sitting in the passenger seat of Milton's car, Marin said, Do I want to know how many favors you owe Harrington for getting the Interpac Policing Cooperative involved in this mess? After that frantic middle-of-the-night call, or early morning in this case, I expected Harrington to wring me dry. Jack started the car and began the familiar drive to Conrad's house. But as soon as I gave him the details, he immediately offered up two contacts. Either Harrington was pissed off about the types of victims Conrad was choosing, or he was appalled by the sheer number of victims out there. In 300 years, there's no telling how many people's lives and families he destroyed. Jack shifted in the seat, trying to find a comfortable position for his throbbing hip. There's no way to know. Harrington didn't share. But those are my two best guesses. I think it more likely Harrington's worried about the exposure risk. Marin frowned. Really? You can pull over and let me drive. How finicky can this hunk of junk be? With an attitude like that, very. Besides, I'm fine. Jack groaned. But I'm not looking forward to hopping fences. Surely it's late enough to park on his street. No one's going to be up at 3 a.m, right? Let's hope. 15 minutes later, Jack was back to being creeped out by Marin's walking through walls act, though he had to admit it was less bizarre the second time. The door opened and Marin poked her head out. Come on already. Jack slipped in and quietly closed the door. I'll check the bottom floor and you do the top. Assuming you're pretty sure nothing's warded in here. Should be good. Marin whispered over her shoulder as she headed to the stairs. I'll pick up the pieces if I'm wrong. Jack was way too tired to even think about being annoyed. He just wanted to get this search over and get some sleep before he had to face Betty and Dottie in the morning. It had been a difficult decision, but Marin and he had agreed to leave Karen out of the follow-up. Nothing they could say would change the fact that her husband was dead, and she was trying to move on. Jack had no idea if that was the right decision, but it was the only one they'd made. He was standing in front of the fridge, getting up the nerve to open it. All he could think about was finding a bunch of hacked-up body parts, when his phone rang. He pulled it from his pocket and answered after he saw that it was Marin. Hey, can you hang on just a sec? He opened the door. Whew. Gatorade, lemonade, iced tea, orange juice. Not a speck of food. Mr. Blevins liked his fluids. Weird. He's got no food in the fridge or cupboards, but about 10 different kinds of drinks. What's up? You need to come upstairs. Marin hung up. Jack considered jogging for about 2 seconds, then decided cryptic didn't equate with urgent, and his freaking hip was killing him. By the time he arrived, Marin had her hands on her hips, her foot tapping, and a look that lacked all sympathy for his battered state. This is not good. Hey, I hurt. You didn't say I needed to hurry. Not that. Marin swung open the door to what looked like a study. This. The walls were covered with shelves, but there weren't any books. Just things, trinkets, doodads, scraps of paper, rows and rows, covering all 4 walls. What is this? Jack had an uneasy feeling, but he wasn't sure why exactly. A trophy room, I'd guess. Marin clutched her arms, hugging herself. All these pieces have a tiny bit of magic, some kind I've never seen, attached to them. I think maybe there's something of the item's owner still clinging to the objects. Very slowly, Jack said, but that's not bad. If the objects holds an imprint of the previous owners, then why does this room make me want to hide in a closet somewhere? A moue of distaste crossed Marin's face. She shook her head. I don't know. All I know is that there's something bad here. Jack nodded to the door and followed Marin out as she left. He took a deep breath out in the hallway. So, not trying to return these to their former owners, right? Marin frantically shook her head. No. Jack put a hand on her arm. Hey, it's okay. When she nodded, he asked, Is there a computer? A laptop in the bedroom. Marin wrinkled her nose. You can go get it if you want it. That's fine. He gave it a little more thought, then said, Okay, I retrieved the laptop, and you burn the trophy room with everything in it. If it's that bad, we shouldn't leave that stuff lying around. Any way to make it look like an electrical fire? Marin huffed. Piece of cake. That's terrifying, Jack said, shaking his head. Arson aside, we good with the plan? Marin nodded. Where's the bedroom? Marin pointed to the last door on the hallway. Jack made a detour to the bedroom, grabbed the laptop from Conrad's nightstand, and hoofed it out of there. Meeting Marin in the hallway again, he asked, We sure we have everything? I'm good. Let me just take care of the tokens or trophies. Marin's nostrils flared. Whatever they are. Do I need to leave, or do we do it from outside? Again, Jack had a vivid image of a neighborhood engulfed in fire. Marin sighed. Seriously? Just wait behind me. I promise not to set you on fire. But don't chatter. Fire in human form is more difficult. Jack pressed his lips together and took a step back. It was bright. White, then brilliant blue, then white, like it couldn't decide. Jack's eyes burned from the light. He closed and rubbed his eyes. By the time he opened them, there was nothing. What the hell? Where's the smoke, the heat? And how did you do that? I flash burned it at high heat. I told you I wouldn't set the neighborhood on fire. Marin shoved on his good shoulder. Get a move on. We should leave just in case that light freaked anyone out. Remember, you can see a bit through the corner of the curtains. Jack stood staring at the blackened room. And this is going to look like an electrical fire? I made sure the origin is clear. They're going to wonder what the heck Conrad had on his shelves that burned like liquid lightning. But that's not our problem. Marin blew a bright red wisp of hair out of her face. Makes him look more suspicious, right? Jack laughed. You think? By the time they'd driven back to the B&B, with Marin behind the wheel, they'd outlined a slightly different tact to take with Dottie, tightened up the story, practiced what they'd say. They'd provide the report by phone, have their FBI contact immediately follow up, and make sure there was an in-person meeting scheduled for tomorrow afternoon. Dottie was a tougher nut than Milton, but when Jack finally sank into his tub in the wee hours of the morning, he was pretty damn sure they could pull it off. Epilogue. Spy, how can I help you? Jack pointed a finger at Marin in warning. She'd started answering the junk shop's second line, the one he very occasionally used for Spirelli Paranormal Investigations, with the spy abbreviation. It seemed a little over the top. She just rolled her eyes and ignored him for the most part. Yes, sir. Marin tapped a button and replaced the handset. Jack, we're on speaker with Harrington. Marin walked to the office door and shut it. No customers in the shop, but the room was warded to be soundproof when the door was shut. I have some news for you regarding that laptop you shipped to us. Harrington sounded tired. Jack took a seat behind his desk. Okay, go ahead. He and Marin exchanged a glance. Harrington didn't usually openly share information, and Jack hadn't asked for anything in exchange for the laptop. He'd wanted someone who could use the information to have it, so he'd shipped it to Harrington. First, your guy had no psychic skills. From what we can tell, he used a combination of research, psychology, cold reading, and persuasion to achieve the psychic effect. Marin and I had guessed as much. Yes, but I should add that his persuasion talent was incredibly strong, Marin said. What I called to tell you, well, Harrington cleared his throat. IPPC would like to thank you for your efforts in this case. We'll also be forwarding a reward that was posted a number of years ago by a Spanish magic-using family who ran into Conrad using a different alias. I'll spare you the details, but they were eager to have him caught. Thank you. Jack knew his tone was flat and he should be more thankful, but something about this case had hit him wrong from the start. It was hard to work up a healthy level of excitement. There's more, I assume? Yes. When he spoke next, Harrington's tone was brisk. We've calculated his feeding requirements based on information he used to track and plan his meals. It appears Blevins required from 4 to 7 victims annually. No. Jack moved to the edge of his seat. No, that can't be right. I'm telling you it is, Harrington replied grimly. I don't think I mentioned it when we spoke last, but we had a healer in the vicinity of the corpse, purely by chance. He was convinced Blevins had died over 300 years previous. Jack clenched his teeth. I'm not doing that math. We suspect Blevins has been actively stealing memories for the last 200, maybe 250 years. If his creator used a different method to sustain him, that would account for the discrepancy. The sound of shuffling papers traveled over the line, then Harrington said, Again, we'd like to thank you for your efforts. If you could send a report to IPPC detailing the specific method of execution and what brought Blevins to your attention, that would be most helpful. A dial tone sounded. Of course he ends the call before I can decline the request for a report. It seems about right for Harrington. A stupid thing to bitch about. But Jack's head was spinning with the possible numbers. Marin settled back into her chair. Maybe. But that was the only thing remotely normal about that call. I get the impression Harrington feels like he owes you. I've definitely not heard him that uncomfortable before. And the giant white elephant? Jack asked. Yeah, how the hell did he get away with it for so long? I don't know, Jack. Staying mobile? Victim choice? Let's just be glad Dottie Wallace loves her mom so much that she likes trendy hair salons and that she decided to walk into your store. Mara nodded. Yeah, I'm calling this a good case. Sure, okay. Jack rubbed his temples. We did catch the bastard. No, seriously. Marin smiled, a genuine smile, not one of her terrifying toothy dragon grins or snarky half smiles. We did something good. Yeah, I guess we did. Jack turned back to his computer. And it's our store, not mine. The end. This has been Spirelli Paranormal Investigations, Episode 2, written by Kate Beret, narrated by Roberto Scarlato. Copyright 2015 by Catherine G. Cobb. Production copyright 2017 by Catherine G. Cobb.